Bihiti Manu, Atakari Mai, Teata, Ka'au, Tihei, Mauriora. Enamana, Enarea, Ero, Rangatirana, Tena Koto. Kitamana Fedua, Nahapo Itoro, Tena Koto. Te Ara Walker, Te Ara Tangata, Tena Koto. Kosayam, Koti Papatipu Te Whare, Koti Oranga Nahele Te Kopapa. Noti Amanaho, Koaho, General Manager, Bio-Based Products, Biomanufacturing. Ko Florian Graichen ho, Novera, Tena Koto, Katoa. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for the very, very kind introduction. I'm not used to speaking in this beautiful theater here or with the appropriate academic gown, but it's really true pleasure to do it. What I started with is Science Me. It speaks about a new day, a new dawn, the birds are singing in the trees, a better future, a better tomorrow. It acknowledges everyone in the room, everyone that brings wisdom and foresight to the kaupapa. And it also, I think it speaks to this adventure that I want to speak about. The purpose of adventure, a better future, a better tomorrow. And I want to take you on this journey. Let me start first by why do I care and why do I think it is such an important part. So there are two parts to the why do I care. One is the professional part. It's the part of what I want to talk about. But then also I want to acknowledge the University of Waikato, and this is the other part why I care. Let me start with the University of Waikato. As you've heard, I had, over the last 6 years, probably 7 years, I've worked very closely with Professor Kim Pickering together in our National Science Challenge Spearhead. SIAM is a very privileged member, proud member of the Amio project. This is extremely well aligned with our work. And for SIAM, partnerships across from industry to academia, iwi, and government are critical. So this is something we treasure and is really important to us. So that's one part. On the professional side, it is my job, and it's what SIAM employs me to do is that part, transitioning linear to circular, different types of economy. But that's only one part. The other part is, personally, I think it is the right thing to do. So professionally, we went to a 2030 strategy, a 2050 timeline. New Zealand has a 2050 net zero goal. And that looks very matter-of-fact spoken. But then on a personal level, I have two kids, 6 and 10. So if I go to 2030, they will be 17 and 30. By 2050, they will be 33 and 37. So everything we do now, it matters. So on a much more personal level, I think it is really critical. So that's why I truly care about that subject. So what I want to do tonight is 4 big parts for the talk. So for an adventure, you normally need a reason to start an adventure. If you're comfortable where you are, and if you're content where you currently at the moment, no big reason to look for an adventure. So I want to describe to you the burning platform that we are facing. The next part is, okay, we've established a burning platform, then the question always is, so what? What should we do? And then one thing I've seen over the couple of years around this topic, around speaking about transitioning or the challenges we are facing, I've seen that at a couple of conferences where when you paint such a grim and such a daunting picture, we had students in the room that really asked them, it's like, what's the point of me studying? So what I want to do is, instead of just leaving it with all these challenges, I want to talk to you about a couple of stories of opportunity. Each of them individually, won't solve all the challenges, but they are the first stepping stones, and just to show you examples what can be done. And then the last thing is, why does it matter, or why do you matter, and why does your day-to-day life matters in this context? So the burning platform. So if you reflect on where we are now and what we now today, it seems to be quite obvious. You all have experienced what happened over summer. There were a lot of voices like, well, climate change has truly arrived, and I think most of you know that that's not truly arrived. It's been with us for a long time. And then there is that, oh, who would have seen that coming? Who would have thought that that truly is an issue? And I just want to point out a news article here from 1912. It's written in New Zealand. And if you look at, you can read through that. This speaks to burning coal and what it does. So it produces carbon dioxide. And this trend makes the air like a blanket for the earth. And it raises the temperature. And the only thing you might disagree with is this here below. The effect may be considerable in a few centuries. So I think they got that one wrong. But the rest, we knew this for over 100 years. So none of that should come as a surprise, what we have to talk today. So the question, why did no one tell us? That's not true. It was likely no one listened. The other part is, and that's interesting to reflect throughout, with COVID still going on, and over the last 4 years. So if you look at what we are facing at the moment, a number of challenges. If you go back to 2019, maybe 2020, we thought the big thing that we're all facing is COVID. So that was this one wave. And then suddenly it's like, oh, there's this thing called recession. And suddenly people is like, oh, and climate change is happening as well. Yeah, that's right. And people then started, well, even worse than rising temperatures, there is that other consequences, like biodiversity loss. And then something I thought, being born, grown up in Europe, I would have never have to talk about is war. And if you put all these things together, these are all the consequences of what can lead, or what the current challenges can lead to. So currently we are facing a number of these waves, and all battering against what we're doing. So there are major challenges that we are facing, and I assume most of you have heard about Earth Overshoot Day. So that's the day in the calendar year where we have statistically used up all the resources that we can renew and replenish. And that day, with the exception of COVID, pretty much is moving forward and forward. So from that day then onward, each year, we are consuming the resources of our children and children's children and next generations. So from that moment on, we treat the Earth like a credit card. And on that level, if the world would live like we live in New Zealand, we would need 5 planets Earth, basically. The other thing that we observe more and more are the crossing of planetary boundaries. So there are 9 planetary boundaries, speaking about the soil, water, beyond just temperature. And starting off in 2009, we crossed 3 of these. 2015 it was 4, 2022 it is 5. So what that shows us is currently the current way of doing things is not sustainable. It can't go on like that. It's a one-way street, and the only thing we're debating is the length of the one-way street, and when we're hitting a massive rock. And it's not about if we will hit that, it's just when we hit that. The other thing I want to do is, again, all this knowledge is summarized in many reports. So the IPCC report that pulls together a lot of this data across the world, what is happening on the climate side, what is happening with temperatures. And I've summarized here the 5, what I think is probably quite grim takeaway messages from this report across the world. So the first one, climate change is hurting our health. I think we've seen over summer you can replace health with life. It's killing people. Then I observed more and more over summer the debate around, we need to adapt basically. And yes, adapting is one part, but you can only adapt to a certain level. If the average temperature is 50 degrees, there is not much left to adapt. If the water levels rise, there's not much left to adapt, or adapting will be extremely expensive. So adapting, yes, but also we need to fundamentally change systems and the way we are working and living. The other part, some things will be lost forever, and this is around biodiversity, biosecurity. We notice that things will definitely be lost, and in that context, the last point 1 doesn't sound much. Every 1/10 of a degree on average temperature rise matters. So there's a lot of urgency in these reports that we really need to translate into actions as soon as practical. The other part on this, I wanted to illustrate what climate change actually means. And it's way beyond it's getting warmer, or it will rain more, or we'll have more floods. That's a part of it, that's correct, but there is so much more. There is from refugees, there is from hunger, there is from food supply challenges. It's a much more diverse picture than just the temperature. And the last point on this slide, unfortunately, it will be the poorest will be hit the hardest. So that comes where any transition that we have to do has to be off the context. No one can be left behind. So what does that mean? And I wanted this talk, I wanted to focus more on a science, engineering, material science level. It doesn't mean that on the social side, design side, biological, environmental side, it's not important, but I wanted to focus on one element of all this transition. And one thing is we still need to make our day-to-day objects. We still need to live. We need clothes. We need furniture. We need all the parts that make our life. And the question then is, if you need to leave fossil resources in the ground, how much do you need to leave in the ground? And if you look at these numbers, and you look at the current projections of our extractive way of living, we are not even near any of these numbers. And this is just for 2 degrees average warming. So there's a significant amount of how we live our life that will have to change if we meant to leave all these things in the ground. And again, in the setting of here and the work that I'm involved in, I believe science, engineering, technology has a lot of the answers here and has to support that. So if you think about that, if you paint that picture in your head, where we are at today, where the world is moving, I think for me that is truly a burning platform that just going ahead the way we've done can't be the solution, and we need to change that. During COVID, I don't know if you can remember that in 2019, 2020, when the world moved into lockdown and we all stayed at home, we didn't go to work, or we worked from home. Sorry, let me rephrase that. We stopped producing. We didn't run the factories, and there were pictures where in India you could see the Himalaya for the first time in 50 years, where around the world, pictures of city where there was, no plane in the sky. It was clear, and there was for a while this that's a way out of the issue. But what that also demonstrated, that sustainability has multiple dimensions. So in that case, we only only worked in one dimension. We didn't look at, is this economically sustainable? Is this socially sustainable? Yes, while it might be environmentally sustainable, all the multiple dimensions have to work. But what it would have shown us is, or could have shown us, is instead of this desire, or we would like to go back to normal, it could have been a possibility to think about, or is it not going back, is it actually going forward to a different opportunity? And I think we still have that, a number of these ways of different thinking still around. The other thing on the so what is, you've heard the burning platform, but it's not going to get easier. Last year, I think it was October or November, statistically, we became an 8 billion people planet. Now, if you go forward over the next, until 2050, we'll be a 10 billion people planet. And this won't be just an additional 2 billion people. This will be rising middle class. They will want to have 6 fashion cycles. They want 2 cars. They want to fly on holiday. They want to have a house in a beach house. So the challenge that we are facing is not going to get any easier. And again, this is a part of this adventure we're on. It's not only resolving material challenges. Where can I get a better plastic? Can I avoid waste? There's a much more fundamental issue around a whole rethinking economy, rethinking what a successful nation should look like. At the moment, we measure success by GDP, but if you look at these numbers, that is definitely not sufficient. And one of the ways I think, and there New Zealand has a huge advantage, is that if you see the issues and you try to see and solve the issues with the same knowledge that you had when you got to the issues, that will lead to failure. And I think this is an advantage why, while it is a huge challenge, it's a huge burning platform, I think New Zealand has a special gift for that. Unlike many other countries, we have the special opportunity to look at a second knowledge system, Te Maori knowledge system, that is built around sustainability, future generations, intergenerational well-being. So we could use this gift and not just rely on traditional ways of solving issues and look at it from a completely different angle. Not many nations have that. New Zealand has that gift, and I think we should use this to avoid exactly this. The other thing I want to point out is quite often people debate, yes, that might all be possible, but that will take too long. And I just want to show you 2 pictures that demonstrate how quickly things can change, and if people try to change them, how quickly things will change. So there's 2 pictures. So the first one is called Spot the Car or Spot the Automotive. So this is in New York, 1900. Everything here with horses and as you would expect it. And there is one little car here. So then you go to 10 years or 13 years ahead, same city, same street, and then the picture is called Spot the Horse. So you see only one left behind there, and that's only 13 years between that. And if you think what it would take to turn a city around that, to build this type of cars, it's remarkable, but it's possible. And I think that should demonstrate, if you really want to change, you can do that in a remarkably short period of time. So the same question, like how quickly can I change a city from horses to cars, is how quickly can I change our economy? Because right now, that's what we have to do. At the moment, we are in this conventional, starting maybe to talk about green, lucky if we are sustainable type of economy. But that's not enough. That will just lock in the status quo. So the type of economy we have to look at, and this is that changing to from horses to cars analogy, it's not a degenerating, it's a regenerating. It's restorative, it's regenerative type of economy. And that is way beyond sustainable. Sustainable is a must-do, but not sufficient. It has to go way beyond just sustainable. It has to work with nature, not take from nature. It's working with nature and building beyond what we are thinking at the moment. The other challenge that we see at the moment quite often when we talk climate change, and you probably, if you read the newspaper, it is this carbon tunnel vision. It is like when you hear it, you think you resolve the carbon challenge or the carbon emission challenge, you will solve climate change. But that's not true, and that's quite a dangerous position to be in. It's important, absolutely, I totally agree with that, but it has to be much more. So you have to look at by far more elements of that issue. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges we face at the moment, where we have, in our personal life, you've seen these waves. There is, your cost of living goes up, but you still have to think about it. But that is, unless we start considering that these big topics, these big rocks that we are facing, we will always just do patchwork and only put plasters on issues. So again, coming to that engineering mindset, what does that mean in terms of consequences? So the big two things on that carbon element are the current energy system that we're looking at, and it's our materials. On the energy side, what it means is decarbonization, and this is a big part that I'm involved in, is looking at what are these sustainable energy sources that we can use. And I think it is really important that it's not what is pitched around the media quite often, it is wind against hydrogen or is solar against bioenergy. That is the wrong attitude. It is against fossil energy, and they all have to work together. The other thing you quite often hear, even in the material side, the term, we need to decarbonize material, or we need to decarbonize our products. And I think that is not helpful, because if you think about your clothes, you can't decarbonize your clothes. That's made out of carbon. You are made out of carbon. So I think it is much more helpful to speak about renewable, because you still have to say, where do you take the carbon? How do you make your clothes? How do you build your houses? So reducing to decarbonizing is not sufficient. And that is the other message I want to leave you with when you think about studying or working in that area of engineering, material science, is how big the impact is. There is always that belief we resolve the energy equation and then that will take care of the challenges, but that's not true. It's important. It's about 55% of the emissions are coming from the energy side, but then nearly the same amount coming from how we grow our food, how we manufacture our products, how we build our houses. So if you think about houses built with concrete, is one of the worst footprints. So what are the better material solutions? Plastic, what are the better solutions? So there is a lot to be done in that materials engineering science space to come up with better solutions. The other thing, and this is important, we do not have to wait to run out of fossil fuel. The transition from the Stone Age into the next age did not happen because the world was running out of stones. There were more than enough stones, yet we moved on. The same with the fossil age will be, we are not going to mine the last barrel of oil. The transition will happen because we come up with better solutions. And the better we can equip the next generation of researchers, the next generation of kids with the tools to do that, the quicker we get off the stones into a more advanced age. So having spoken about that, we need to keep carbon in the ground, but we still need to dress 10 billion people. So where do we take all that material from that we have there? And it's two things to this slide. So one, it requires a system change. Simply thinking our current system with 6 fashion cycles and everyone having their own cars, that won't work with renewable feedstock either. So there is an element of rethinking businesses, rethinking ways of living, but also rethinking where we take the material to make these goods. And if you take fossil, be it coal, be it crude oil, be it other sources of non-renewable material out, you've got essentially 3 forms of carbon, of building blocks that you can use. So that's from the technosphere, the atmosphere, and the biosphere. So the technosphere, I really want to show you, I want you think about more than just recycling. So this is really your reusing things. We have so many things already in our economy, in our daily lives. Yes, we recycle some, but how can we repair, rethink, reuse, redesign better? So that's one big pot. You will always need some new materials. Things break. So that is where the other 2 pots come from. So the biosphere, so think about bioplastics, bioenergy. There are some new carbon that we can use, that we can insert that system, as long as the feedstock is grown sustainably. And the last one, it's kind of an emerging field of research, is we have CO2 in the atmosphere, and smart science, technology, and approaches allow us to turn then that out of the atmosphere directly into products or into materials. So these are the 3 pots we can use. And again, they are not to be played out against each other. Is the one better than the other? They all have their reason and their purpose. And if you play this against each other, it becomes the only winner will be the fossil bucket that we definitely have to keep in the ground. Otherwise, you've seen the numbers. And what that would mean for our economy, and if you take the use of oil, or the amount of oil we are mining as a proxy for standing our current linear way of living, and you span the timeline from the year 1000 to the year 3000, and you plot upwards the amount of oil consumption, and someone living in 50, 60 years in the future will look back, then that's what it will look like. There will be our current way of living is this brief blip in history. In the past, we lived with the land or off the land. In the future, we will live with the land, off the land. And there's only this kind of little strange thing in the middle where people thought, yes, taking non-renewable things out of the ground is a good idea. Where and when this will bottom off, it's not to scale, but that ultimately is what we're looking at the moment with this transition, with this point in time. The other thing I think that's important, and that's where I want to get with some of the stories of success and stories of what has happened in the country. When President Kennedy spoke about reaching the moon, he spoke about the challenge of a generation. I think our previous Prime Minister spoke about climate change as the challenge of a generation. And that sounds very daunting. I think the other thing we should look at it is the opportunity of a generation, because it's the opportunity to really rethink the economy and do things differently and do things better. So yes, it's the challenge, but I also would like that we see it as the opportunity of the generation. And speaking of opportunity, that's where I want to talk you now through a couple of examples. It's very centric to what I'm exposed to, so it's very personal stories of activities we've done at Scion, and happy to then go into more detail later or after the lecture. that's the other part, is with all these stories, in itself they might, why didn't you do this, or why did you not do it better, or you could have done it faster. Like all these things, it's important to start with the first step. The whole journey we are on is 1,000 miles. It's more than just one step, but the important thing is to get started. They all could be summarized under one thing that we see at Scion as one of the mission, vision, and purpose, is that ultimately anything you have made or we're making from fossil fuel at the moment could be made from a tree tomorrow. So if you a big statement, but ultimately I think if you expand it to the other three forms of renewable carbon, that is definitely true. So the first example I want to tell you is the story from a company called Usefully. So the problem they would like to address is, in New Zealand we have 220,000 tons of textiles going to landfill every year. So 220,000 tons of textile. So they will just dig into the ground. What we worked on with Usefully is not the whole sustainable textile part. It's resolving one element. We're talking here not about the school uniforms you can pass on to the next generation, or swapping clothes. That still has to happen. This is really textiles that end up you can't use it in any other way anymore. At the same time, what New Zealand does, we import about 200,000 tons of additives for roading that we need to make our stick the bitumen and stick the asphalt together. So what we developed with that company is a way of using these textiles, process these textiles, so instead of importing 200,000 tons of additives, we could use that for our roads instead. So you cut out exports, and you put these textiles or the material out of the textiles to a good use. Artists and designers. I'm a scientist, I'm a chemist by training, but I think one of the biggest roles in that whole transition have the journalists, the artists, and the designers to play. And this is one example where we're working with David Trubridge. He's probably best known for his lamps. And working with him allows us to bring materials to life. And we were privileged to work with him for the New Zealand exhibition in Dubai, where we combined PowerShell, Harakiki fiber, kind of materials of New Zealand relevance, and he turned it into beautiful lamps that were used in the New Zealand pavilion. And a lot of part of this change management is you need to show to people what is possible. And as a scientist, you're used to producing, simple test samples, but when we get to work with David and he makes beautiful lamps, it's much easier to excite people about material and material properties than it is just with test samples. Biofuels, big part of our work, and this is where New Zealand has a huge need. I assume most of you have family probably overseas, friends overseas, so yes, we will want to travel, and part of living in New Zealand is you will get on a plane eventually. So the big thing is, how do we decarbonize that? Internally, for internal flights, we're looking at probably by 2030 will be electrified. The moment you fly across the ditch, you need liquid fuel. So instead of importing fuel, we could use our trees, sustainably grown trees, convert that into biofuel. Similar with shipping. 99% of our economy is dependent on export-import. And if you look at the boats currently underway, they will be on the oceans for the next decades to come. All the ships we're building at the moment need liquid fuel. So there's another opportunity for our amazing produce, amazing fruit, vegetable, to reach the global markets in a sustainable way by producing and manufacturing sustainable marine fuel in New Zealand. So these are two big topics we are working on. Ecogas. It's a beautiful example of what science can mean for a small community in New Zealand, but also how what we refer to as waste is actually an important resource. So what Ecogas did in Raparoa, so between Rotorua and Taupo, they built the first commercial anaerobic digester. So an anaerobic digester takes biomaterials, some microbes, and turns that into biogas, so bioenergy. What Ecogas does, they're using the organic waste, food waste, for about 75,000 tons, and using that in their facility. Next to them, they have the greenhouses from Turneth growers. So they use that to heat the greenhouses with renewable energy, produces food, and as a byproduct, you get biofertilizer. So that created about 50, 60 jobs in the region and allowed, as I said, to divert at least 75,000 tons of food waste from landfill. Again, it's a bigger picture, food waste, but again, there's so much organic waste in our landfill that we can actually do these things. And we're exploring with them other parts of the country where these similar facilities make sense. Agrisea, it's a small company in Paroa, family-owned business working with seaweed, and they've been using seaweed in biofertilizers, cosmetics, and the like. Our team started working with them and looking at what else can you make out of seaweed, and they came up with an interesting material called nanocellulose. So that is, you're processing your seaweed, Agrisea can go and do their cosmetics, fertilizers, whatever they do with it, and with what is left over, you can process it to what's called nanocellulose. Well, what can you use nanocellulose for? You can use quite amazing things with it. You can use them in planting of trees. You can use them in medical care, wound care. You can use them in printed electronics. You can use them in all sorts of other applications. But again, what that showed is like taking a waste stream in a rural regional setting, a company that allows them to produce new things. And Agrisea has employed a dozen more people to take that beyond their current business. It's an extremely exciting opportunity because it's also so closely linked to the local community, local iwi and hapu that are collecting the seaweed and getting the benefit of that science. Plastic waste. We've got millions of pieces of plastic in the horticulture, agriculture sector. Easy to say you should reuse, but if you look at that, that is full of dirt, that is very hard to find, it's distributed all over the place. What we did there, we worked with an entrepreneurial company to look at these nursery pots. Hundreds of thousands of them are used in nurseries across New Zealand every year. And we've got it now to a stage where the company is producing biodegradable pots, so they can be planted together with the trees or with the seedlings, remain in the ground, do not degrade to microplastics, and go back to CO2 and water. So it's a great entrepreneurial opportunity, again, for New Zealand companies in that field, not just to make it plastic-free, but to make it actually a better material. Distributed manufacturing. So this is something around that of completely rethinking how manufacturing works. In a world of fossil energy or crude oil, what you have is these massive refineries because your whole feedstock is highly centralized in crude oil. So the world built whole cities based on refining. Going forward now, what we're looking at is actually completely different feedstock. We don't have these big central pieces of crude oil anymore. If we're looking at how can we make best use of our horticulture, agricultural, viticulture type of waste, we have to rethink how we do manufacturing, how we do processing. And one way of that is, in the past, you had these massive ships, crude oil ships, bringing the feedstock to the factory, processing it here. Now we turn that around. We say instead of bringing, scattered, seasonal, regional, little bit of feedstock to big centralized facilities will turn it around and bring the facility to the feedstock. So you can imagine 40-foot containers into the Marlborough wine growing region, maybe during wine harvest. You have for 6 to 8 weeks, you've got wine pomace. You can put a factory there that processes wine pomace to materials, densifies it so it can be shipped on. It could be forest slash, it could be agricultural harvesting stubble, so you can change the type of processing that you do there without having to ship around all these seasonal and scattered type of feedstock. We've got, I think, one of our staff member, Angelique, is here, so that's her baby. And this is looking at 3D printing material, not only 3D printing, but it has the ability also to respond to heat. And she designed their material that is biodegradable, but also can respond to temperature. So for a big part of what we do is also how do you inspire the next generation? You have to give them some more interesting material than just plastic. So what Angelique did, she developed here a type of material that can be 3D printed, changes by heat and temperature. And we found with a small New Zealand company, Imagine Plastics, that are selling that, and you can order that type of material online now. So while in itself not a big kind of solving global issues, but what it allows, it inspires, again, that next generation of students to look at there are different materials available, and they want to play with it and want to explore what is possible. So with all these stories, and we hear that a lot, it's like, well, that's fine if you can, replace a little bit of plastics with that, and if you can make, take a couple of 1,000 tons out of landfill. Everyone is, that doesn't make a big difference. But as you know, if you try to sleep with a mosquito, it can't be that small that it makes a huge difference. And I think that's the important thing. It won't be that one massive thing that will make a difference. It's this continuous small things, small steps, first step that will make that big change and the big difference. So I think you matter and it matters. You can't sit back and wait for someone else to do that. I think especially in a university setting, you have to be the change that you want to see. There's so many reasons why others are not doing it, or it can't happen or it won't happen. If you want to see the change, every one of you can be a part of that whole doing things differently, looking at things differently, thinking about what you buy. You have, as a consumer, you've got enormous power in doing your bit, even without groundbreaking science. The other part, and this speaks to the opportunity, and I think this is where New Zealand needs to go. The world is changing. Everything I've told you at the moment this is happening across the whole world. Us as a country being a part of that whole global system, and we will remain a part of that global system, is if we are not disrupting, we will be disrupted. Doesn't matter in which parts of that whole value network we are in, sustainability, renewability, regenerative type of businesses, that is where the future is. Unless we do that, it will be brought upon us. And I like that quote from Paulus, is we don't know where we're going, and I think the only certainty that we have is uncertainty. And the best way to respond to the uncertainty is through disrupting, not waiting for disruption. So I spoke about 2030. So my kids will be, 13 and 17, then 37, 33. And I picked here basically the dawn of the 22nd century, and 2050 sounds so far away. 2100 sounds even further away. And so why would you even care about anything I've said in this whole presentation? And you think about your children, your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, doesn't matter, friends. And not my quote, it's a quote of a New Yorker journalist. Anyone sitting in this room either loves someone or will love someone who is alive at the dawn of the 22nd century. So if you don't do it for yourself, you need to do it for someone else. And I think that's a big part of this intergenerational responsibility we have. Thanks very much.